Hello there friends and welcome. For today's Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader Guide, we have at long last an updated build for Abelard, everyone's favorite companion. And we'll not only make him the ultimate tank possible, with enormous damage reduction from both deflection and also armor, to the point where even early in the game during Act 1, he'll suffer no damage whatsoever, that's 0 damage taken from most enemy attacks, with an enormous amount of HP including temporary wounds, for around 800 plus, with the ultimate melee damage potential as well, with higher than even 500 strength, and absolutely broken extra damage sources per single hit, with the very powerful new multi-hit chainsaw weapons, so that your Abelard can deal even higher than 20,000 damage per single attack. It doesn't get any better than that. For the complete warrior package, maximum tanking as early as Act 1, and absolutely broken overpowered damage from Act 2 onwards. So without further ado, let us get started into our Abelard, the godly tank DPS build. Abelard comes the earliest out of all story party members, so you have the biggest amount of customization over him, which is of course always welcome. For skills, first be sure to focus all out into athletics. There's always lots of athletics checks, usually once per map area even or more, so it's great overall. Level 3 means Endure, one of the best warrior abilities for extra defenses, and I'll cover it in the how to play section better. Level 4 means our heroic action, Daring Breach, actually the second best in the game besides Officer's Finest Hour. For the first warrior talent, we wanna focus into extra defenses first, because early game, on unfair, especially the new permadeath mode, you'll still be getting hit a lot. So first be sure to grab Thick Skin. This will increase Abelard's deflection by +1. It might not seem like much, but deflection sources stack in this game. Most importantly, your parry chance will be increased by 25% of your total armor, which will be high for Abelard as a heavy armor tank. Oh, and by the way, nowadays I actually changed Abelard, thankfully, so that he already comes for free with heavy armor proficiency. As a matter of fact, he even starts with heavy armor as gear, so you won't have to bother picking that anymore. For the second talent at level 5, go for Clenched Thief, one of the best ways of achieving enormous damage deflection. It will be based on your toughness modifier against the first attack made by every enemy this combat. Which is great because you know the first round of battle is always the one that matters the most. If you're already getting heavily damaged in the first turn, chances are you won't survive to see the other ones. Plus the amount is really high, so that even at the very early game, your Abelard will already take 0 damage from a lot of enemies, including burst attacks, which are deadly. For stats, you have two options. You can increase either weapon skill or toughness first. I'd rather toughness for more defenses, as it's also tied to a lot of warrior abilities like Endure, Clenched Thief, and other stuff you'll pick. It's just that early on, at least on unfair mode, if you don't focus into weapon skills, your Abelard won't have the best to hit chance, only around 60% or so, but we can overcome that later. He's mostly meant for tanking early game anyways, so toughness is my preferred safest pick here. For the first warrior power, Sworn Enemy all the way. You can mark one enemy, and you'll get not only a huge amount of extra armor against it, but even more melee damage based on your strength modifier, with the addition of one extra action point if you get attacked by the target. It's of course amazing for tough enemies, including bosses. Then more athletics, followed by more toughness. Then for the first generic talent, grab Dueling Mastery to increase your parry, which will be one of the biggest defenses against melee enemies, the most dangerous ones because they'll have very high critical chance. Once you finish increasing athletics, go all out into Carouse. It is true that there aren't really that many Carouse checks in the game when compared to other skills like athletics, the dialogue ones and so on, but I don't think anyone else in your party will have high Carouse, and the best heavy armor in the game for tanking will increase your deflection by absurdly broken amounts based on Carouse, so it's great to have on Abelard anyways. Then for level 9, what you want is Defensive Stance. If you have yet to attack this turn, Abelard will get a huge bonus to his armor percentage, and you can even charge and slash on the same turn and still retain the benefit. Just like Clenched Thief, this is mostly here because it really helps you tank during the first turn of battle, and Abelard as a heavy armor tank will not have high agility, which means of course chances are enemies will act before him, but if they can't damage you, well, Abelard will serve his purpose. For the first upgrade to Daring Breach, be sure to pick the second one. This is what lets you slice and dice through the battlefield and keep the pain train going as a melee character. Because whenever you kill an enemy, you'll get +4 movement points for each kill, and still retain the ability to move after attacking or using abilities. By level 10, your Abelard will already have the best defensive feats. So I'd much rather start increasing our offensive potential now, first, with ramming speed, which increases your charge distance by 3 cells. Very welcome because you can always charge an attack in the same turn, for double damage, and charge can even be used as an extra way of moving. After that is when I recommend you start increasing weapon skill, which is tied to both 2-hit chance and critical hit chance, as a melee character. For the third warrior power, Taunting Scream. This hits a huge area, and will essentially force enemies into attacking Abelard if they fail a willpower saving throw, which becomes very easy to accomplish because you know Cassia can highly debuff the enemy's willpower, and she'll always act before Abelard with my new build for her anyways. Plus you have a special helmet that highly increases the chances of this working. And there's a lot of other skills that increase your defenses based on how many enemies you taunted. For another generic talent, my preferred pick is Doing My Part. This is very useful in that it will reduce the cost of your first archetype ability used in each combat by -1 AP, which can reduce it to 0. The thing is, if you have multiple warriors in your party, this won't do anything, so skip it. It's just that for me, Abelard is the only warrior I have in my active party, especially now that the new melee party member, Kibela, is not a warrior. Plus, it actually works with your second archetype abilities as well, and you'll be going Vanguard, another archetype I don't have besides Abelard. It also has amazing synergy with extra turns, as I'll explain in the how to play section, because Abelard can then buff himself with most of his powerful defensive abilities before any enemy gets a turn. Then more weapon skill, more carouse. And for another warrior talent, you have a few different options because this will be your last one before Exemplar levels much later. Since you picked ramming speed already, you might as well pick impetus, which will increase your charge damage by a huge amount whenever used from a distance of 5 cells or more, and you do have increased range on it. But if you want more mobility, you can also pick rigorous training, which will make it so that you can both charge and still retain the ability to move on the same turn. It's just that the extra bonus to dodge won't really matter much for a heavy armor tank, so I'd much rather pick impetus now. Once you max athletics and carouse, there's honestly not really anything good for Abelard here because the rest of my party will cover all of these skills, but you might as well pick Medicae because he can heal your party with medikits. And more strength as the last stat upgrade as warrior. Strength is directly tied to your melee damage, but later Abelard will have even higher than 200-300 strength from gear and class skills. For the last generic talent you have a few options. You can pick Combat Master, but in the case of Abelard, it's much better to go for Do Not Falter, because it will essentially provide the same benefit but party-wide. It's just that nowadays I don't find this that necessary, because if you're going with my other party member builds like Cassia and main character, because you always act before the enemies at this point, level 16+, Cassia for example can already debuff and crowd control enemies, so it's not like Abelard will be getting ganked by multiple melee enemies. I'd rather pick this later when you have the space for it. For now, what I prefer is Stronger Together. This will increase the toughness of all allies besides Abelard himself by +5, which can actually help because some party members start with an odd score in toughness, so if you make it an even score with this +5, they'll get bonus to hit points. For the last upgrade to Daring Breach, be sure to pick number 4. Which will highly increase your damage based on your strength modifier. It might not seem like much earlier, but remember, starting from the second chapter, your Abelard can get hundreds worth of strength. Now it's time to pick our prestige archetype for Abelard. The best pick is Vanguard. It's not only the one that fits him the most thematically as the heavy armor tank, but Vanguard has 2 abilities that are extremely powerful for dealing extra damage actually, broken tiers of damage even, despite the fact it's the main tanking class. The unyielding beacon feature is okay at most because it kinda requires you to be damaged first, and when you have such powerful alpha strikes with my other party member builds, you won't really be getting hit that much. However, the secondary property of allowing you to stack temporary HP is really powerful. Not just because of gear, I'll explain in the gear section that you can already have at this point, but also some warrior abilities, like Endure, will provide you with temporary HP. Most importantly, there's a very powerful Vanguard talent that I'll soon cover, and well, it will increase your strength by absolutely hilariously broken amounts for the ultimate melee damage. Anyways, for the first Vanguard power, be sure to go for Wall of Rock Crit. This will hit all nearby party members, which is great, and buff them so that they take minus 50% less damage from the next attack, which is a huge amount. This is especially good against bosses that get extra turns as you damage them enough, because since you can't really prevent that, they will be attacking your party members, but if they're taking minus 50% less damage, they'll be able to survive just fine. After that, for another generic talent, well, you might as well pick Do Not Falter now, because you have the space for it. Followed by the ultimate strength boosting talent in the game for any archetype, Beacon of Might. At the start of Abelard's turn, he'll get a tremendous boost to strength, directly equal to the amount of temporary HP he has, which at this point can already be higher than 100 easily. This is how you get even higher than 500 strength later, which of course means an absurdly broken extra damage source. The only downside is that Beacon of Might only procs during your actual first true turn, so it won't really work during extra turns provided by allies. But it's definitely an amazing boost to damage. The Vanguard heroic action Unyielding Guard is not that it's bad, but it's nowhere near as good as the warrior one, Daring Breach, which is the one you'll be using because you can't really use both. Then for level 20, honestly at this time you have enough tanking potential, so I'd much rather start increasing weapon skill for higher 2-hit chances. Then more weapon skill, followed by another very powerful Vanguard talent, Enduring Shield. So long as you have at least one temporary HP, you'll always have that, Abelard will get a huge bonus to both parry and armor based on his toughness, which are of course your main defenses. For the second Vanguard power, honestly they don't matter that much outside of Wall of Rock Crit, but you might as well go for Defensive Stance, because it lets you counterattack enemies whenever parrying them, and it's great for extra damage. But you might as well also go for Bulwark, it's just that ranged enemies aren't really dangerous for Abelard, so I'd rather save this for later. Then a return to increases in athletics. Now I'll be blunt, the other Vanguard talents aren't really that amazing, at least nowhere near as good as Beacon of Might and Enduring Shield, because they are usually tied to Unyielding Beacon stacks, because as I said they do require you to be attacked first, which is kind of an annoying limitation when you have such powerful alpha strikes, before enemies can react. But they do serve as a way of increasing your defenses even further, and are amazing against the actual true toughest battle of the game, including on unfair mode, during Act 3 when you won't really have any gear and party members. So let's start increasing your defenses even further now. And of course, if you don't have that many officers in your party making powerful alpha strikes, it helps for Abelard to have them. My preferred pick first is Resilient Beacon, which will highly reduce the damage Abelard takes from critical hits. On unfair mode, melee enemies have very high critical hits chance, so this is a tremendous benefit, especially the melee demons. After that, you might as well pick It Will Not Die for Abelard. The reality is you can pick this even as early as the first warrior archetype, it's just that we have such high defenses as Abelard, including the highest hit points even before this, that nowadays I don't think it's that necessary to rush for it so early. But you can if you want. For example, pick it instead of Stronger Together during level 14 or so, when you're still a warrior, and delay Stronger Together for now if you prefer. Once you max weapon skill, it's all back into toughness. For another generic talent, well, you might as well increase weapon skill now through characteristic training. Then go for counterattack stance, which will increase both the damage of your counterattacks under defensive stance and also the chances of them hitting the enemies and getting critical hits. Followed by more athletics and more toughness. Any upgrade for Unyielding Guard, you might as well pick the first one. Like I said, you'll never use it. it's much better to actually use Daring Breach. Then grab Center of Attention. Every enemy that considers Abelard a priority target, so has been taunted, will increase your armor by a very nice stacking amount. Once you max Athletics, back into Carouse. And after that, more Strength. Then the Bulwark, Vanguard power. It's not really that necessary, but you have the space for it now. Followed by Taunting Defense, which increases your parry by a very nice amount against taunted enemies. Then more Strength and Carouse. For the last Vanguard talent until Exemplar levels, which are coming very soon anyways, go for Renitent Beacon, which will increase your parry and armor by every stack of Unyielding Beacon, which can help in Chapter 3 because, well, for the beginning, you won't have your gear. As far as the last generic talent, it's time to pick No Heresy. This will increase both your armor and critical hit chance against Xenos or demonic creatures, which helps a lot because you know this is exactly when you'll be entering Chapter 3. At least if you do all the content of the game, especially now with the DLC for more experience, and Chapter 3 is basically Xenos Central. The last upgrade to Unyielding Guard can really be anything, either the 4th or 2nd one. Now let us cover Exemplar progression for our Uber Tank and DPS Abelard. And there's two ways you can do this. You can go for more offenses outright or more defenses. For extra offenses you have the classic Extermination feat, which increases your damage by huge stacking amounts, but you have more than enough from our temporary wounds from gear as early as the 2nd chapter. In the spirit of making Abelard the best tank possible, I'd rather focus into defensive talents first. Starting with Steel Shell, which doubles your deflection against single target attacks, both ranged and melee. And well, at this point, Chapter 4, you can already find the best ultimate heavy armor for tanking, which will increase Abelard's deflection by absolutely broken amounts. Way harder in battle, we are talking about 40 plus. When that's doubled 80 plus, nothing will ever hit you, at least for any damage whatsoever. So even if the rest of your party dies, which I find highly unlikely with my builds, Abelard will stay alive forever and ever. We can actually pick more warrior talents now. They aren't that necessary, but have nice enough benefits. First, grab Crowd Kill, which increases your area of effect damage, and some melee weapons do have AoE attacks, by a very big amount because it's based on strength, and at this point it will be boosted to the skies, for each enemy in the area of effect. Then, for skills, because you can get the uber heavy armor now that increases your deflection based on Carouse, I'd rather ignore Athletics and go all out into Carouse, for as long as we can. The other Vanguard talents don't matter that much, so you can kinda go with whatever you want. Might as well pick Covering Bulwark because it's fun, making Abelard count as cover for allies anyways. Then more weapon skill. We really want to maximize our 2-hit chances and critical chance. And now you can actually increase your toughness, also strength to characteristic training, but once again, because of the best heavy armor, why not get even more Carouse, so base skill Carouse. For another warrior power, Reckless Strike. This can increase your damage by enormous amounts, especially because it also bypasses the enemy's armor based on your strength, which is boosted by Beacon of Might to hilariously broken amounts. It's just that enemies that survive will hit you back with a counterattack. Since now you have such overpowered defenses, you might as well pick it, because you can activate it with little consequence. And for the second defensive talent, Unbreakable Will. This will grant a bonus to all resistance tests equal to, well, your deflection amount. Is actually going to be higher than 100, which means Abelard at this point will never fail any check. Not skill checks, actual checks during combat like willpower, agility, whatever, checks for crowd control effects and so on. You'll always have a 100% chance. So you won't just ignore all damage, you also automatically make all saving throws. It's quite fun. Like I said, you can grab whatever Vanguard talents now. Might as well pick Selfless Resilience. The only reason I don't pick this early is that I don't think it's working quite correctly, or maybe it's only when you get attacked, but the extra bonus to armor for allies wasn't really showing on my character sheet when using it with Wall of Rockrete, the main Vanguard power we picked way before. Then more weapon skill, and well, since you have the space for it, rigorous training for more mobility. Followed by Force Distraction. Although this doesn't really matter that much, you already have a taunt ability from Warrior. Once you max weapon skill, it's the same logic as before, back into toughness, and later strength. Followed by Protective World. The effect is very minor, but you have the space for it now. Then Advanced Skill Carouse, for even higher damage deflection. Once you max carouse, well, might as well go back into athletics. For another Vanguard talent, for the ultimate defenses, go for tough as steel for even higher hit points, especially because later, your hit points will also increase your strength as an Exemplar. But don't forget, if you want the best damage increase, grab Extermination, well, as early as you can. After that, Interception, although the benefit is rather minor at this point. Then more athletics. It's the same logic as the Vanguard talents, the warrior ones, remaining now anyways, aren't really that good. So pick whatever you want. But for me, open engagement now. Once you max athletics and carouse, you might as well increase either Medicae or awareness. Then punish the imprudent, followed by more toughness. And after that, start increasing strength, more awareness or Medicae, and pick condition now to increase our strength by enormous amounts, equal to 20% of your maximum HP, which at this point is very high. Then Desolation as a warrior talent, followed by Unflinching. There's actually some minor synergy with Unflinching and Unyielding Beacon stacks in that if Abelard is at the range of an ally burst attack, they won't take any damage, but it already serves as a way of increasing your Unyielding Beacon stack, so you can even pick this way earlier if you want. Then more awareness, and Living Shield. And Ready to Serve. It's a minor benefit for Abelard, but we really ran out of the best warrior and Vanguard stuff to pick. Since you already max carouse now from extra skill feats, go with characteristic training Toughness, followed by Breakthrough, more strength, and for the last Exemplar talent, well, you might also pick Extermination now if you want the highest damage, or before like I mentioned, but there's always Perfection under Fire 4+5 to all stats. But you can even go with something like Unstoppable as well. And the last archetype talent can really be anything. Let's grab Easy Target. And that's it for our full progression as our Uber Tank and DPS Abelard. Now let's do a quick section on how to properly play as our Abelard build. First with the early game. As far as battle positioning, because he's the main tank of the party, ideally you want him to start ahead of the other allies. Only during Act 1 though, for reasons I'll explain later. And well, since you can, behind cover as well. Just be careful because nowadays some pieces of cover can be blown up by enemies and you'll take heavy damage if they do that. Also, melee enemies are actually the most dangerous ones because they can hit hard and have high critical chance. Ranged ones not so really for Abelard. Therefore, since you have low initiative because of your low agility, don't start in a place where melee enemies will get the upper hand on you. So for example, this bruiser guy here is gonna act first before Abelard, and chances are he can move to where we are, so you might as well start behind the cover here. The good thing is your Abelard will mostly be taking 0 damage only, or very minor damage. But once your turn comes, either your true first turn or from an officer's bring it down ability, for example, always activate first Brace for Impact because it will highly increase your damage deflection for 2 points for every archetype you have for a maximum of +6 later, and it doesn't cost anything, but only works for 1 turn and you can't really use it anymore during combat, only once. But as always, the first turn is what matters the most.
At your beck and call.
Then go for Endure, not only for even more deflection which stacks, but also a very nice amount of temporary HP.
I will do my duty.
After that, you can use Sworn Enemy on the toughest target that's nearby. There's no point in using it against trash with low hit points like Rebel Gunners here, but against, let's say, the Bruiser Rebel, it's more attractive. Something fun you can do early on for nice damage is go for the Power Swing ability of our Hammer weapon. I'll cover it in the gear section, but it increases the push distance by +5 cells. And since the normal push is already your strength bonus as normal cells, by pushing this guy here, he's gonna hit the other enemy, or the wall if there wasn't any enemy here, and suffer increased damage, plus also increase our temporary HP based on the Relished Anguish item. Both these items are found pretty early in Act 1 still. But anyways, let's go for the Harsh Shove, and watch the magic happen. So we already dealt high damage, and the guy actually got extra collision from the placeable here. I honestly didn't think that was gonna happen, but even better for us. So you not only dealt 26 power damage, but also 24 impact damage, which was enough to one-shot him. Since we are out of AP now, you kinda have to pass your turn, but later, with the Pneumo Boots, they will reduce your charge cost by 1 AP, so still be able to charge in the same round. Anyways, pushing enemies is fun for damage and defenses because when you do it with the Relished Anguish and pass your turn, Abelard will now have loads of extra temporary HP. We have 66. And the good thing is whatever damage you take will be reduced by your temporary HP. Although most times it's going to be either 0 damage or vastly reduced damage. If there's melee enemies in range, it becomes more attractive to actually use Bring It Down from an officer on Abelard. And you'll always want to use Endure on every new turn. Don't bother doing extra turns if you already used it before because it won't stack. Honestly, pushing enemies is really fun. Just do note that you can't push an enemy if they're already next to an obstacle, it won't really work. Anyways, don't forget that you can normal attack and still use charge in the same turn. Charge, of course, can be used for hitting enemies that are far away, or let's say you didn't have enough range to hit this enemy with charge. Well, you can still use it to move, even without hitting an enemy. For example, obviously you would want to hit the enemy, but you can end next to them if you didn't have enough range and so on. And since Abelard is so tanky, it won't matter that much that he's outside of cover, unlike your more frail party members. Now, for Act 2+, I like to play a bit differently because of course you'll have much more powerful abilities. Most importantly, I'd rather have Abelard start closer to the party instead of ahead, because at this point, you know, you'll have multiple party members if you're following my builds that will always act before the enemies. And being close is quite useful. First, because Pascal, through the new Missionary Oath item that I'll explain in my build for him, can grant an extra turn to everyone that's nearby. And this is quite useful for Abelard because it means he can instantly activate Brace for Impact, which of course will highly increase his deflection, the same for all nearby allies, even before any enemies get to act. Followed by the Vanguard's Wall of Rockreed, which by the way also only costs 0 AP, since we have the Doing My Part talent from the Imperial World background Abelard has. So through this you're already also reducing party member damage taken. Then you can also activate Endure for 0 AP because it's a warrior ability and the talent is per archetype, so Vanguard 0, then Endure 0. And you know, you actually still even have 1 extra AP that you can spend, for example, on, let's say, Taunting Scream, to taunt all the remaining enemies, Sworn Enemy, or even use Charge, because at this point you already have the Pneumo Boots, and it will only cost 1 AP, to get closer to the enemies and bait them into attacking you. But Taunting Scream is safer if the enemies are close enough to you already. So even before the enemies get to act, by virtue of getting an extra turn, our Abelard is already set up to defeat the enemies. The same for our party members with extra defenses. Because of course they'll also have an extra turn and so on. Forewarning is a very nice buff to use on Abelard for higher parry, especially as my updated Officer Sarker build will also have 0 cost on most of their buffs.
And so shall it be done.
And we can even use other stuff as well if you want, all during this neat little extra turn. For more defenses, more damage and so on, even momentum. Cassia is also very powerful for buffing Abelard, because of the infusing staff she has. I've already covered it in my build for her. But especially Reveal the Light because of the huge increase to toughness, which of course increases his hit points and a lot of his toughness based tanky abilities. So just at the start of battle you already have 17 deflection. And it's not even your first true turn. Anyways, don't forget Cassia's Point of Curiosity is great, so that first if an enemy moves away from Abelard and he's close enough, you'll get an attack of opportunity for free. Also to set up combat zones. Frontline actually increases both the damage enemies take and the armor percentage for allies inside it, so it's amazing for tanks like him. But just as an example of more fun stuff you can do during extra turns at this point of the game, is cast Bring It Down on Abelard, because his charge will only cost 1 AP anyways. So you can use it to move close enough to enemies. Oh, and for single target attacks, always go for the chainsaws. So charge on normal hits.
Victory, and I took care of this one.
And then, since you'll be close enough, You can use your hammer weapon whenever you have a lot of nearby enemies for the Thunder Slam ability, so you can hit multiple ones per strike.
It will be done. Like the
Bam, and of course, chances are you'll be killing some, even one-shotting a few. If you're already at high momentum, with my party guides you'll be, you can activate Daring Breach. This is absolutely busted, but remember, it will restore all of your AP and provide you with extra MP. Therefore, only use it after you spend it all, so you don't have any AP remaining nor movement points, because it will be refreshed anyways. And through it, you can keep the pain train going. Don't bother repeating abilities like Wall of Recruit or Endure, because they won't stack with themselves if you already activated them. But well, you can just keep on spamming Thunder Slam if you have a lot of nearby enemies. It's very satisfying to use. But if you just have single enemies, go for the Chainsaw Strike, which as you can see here, will hit like a truck. Because the Malpian Shroud is already kicking in for loads of damage, even at Chapter 2 only. Sadly, the strength boost from Beacon of Might only triggers when it's actually your true first turn. Which is why we aren't buffed with it yet, because it's from extra turns that we're attacking. But you know, it's very fun and a lot of extra damage still. Who doesn't want to chainsaw enemies? But once your first true turn comes, that is when you get the godly strength boost from Beacon of Might. Which of course means even more broken tiers of damage with your chainsaws, for let's say 1000 here. There we go, one shot. Don't forget you can charge after that. Even go for let's say Sworn Enemy first, because we can. And one shot again. This is all despite the fact the turrets had higher than 100 armor percentage. But our chainsaw ignores, what, 50% of that. Now let us cover gear for our Abelard build, first with Chapter 1 options. For armor, as I mentioned before, he already starts with heavy armor now, the Seneschal's trusty carapace. But as early as the Chapter 1 start, you can already get something slightly better, by buying a heavy leather armor from the Thunderfang merchant vessel, even at the lowest reputation possible. Which comes with a 5% extra armor increase. The same for later in the chapter when you get to buy the best Chapter 1 heavy armor, the Stormtrooper carapace, for 45% armor percentage and 1 extra deflection against human enemies, the most common enemies early game. For helmet, I like the Helm of Determination, as it will increase both your armor and also a minor fellowship increase. Then for accessories with talismans, we have the Grace of the Oblivious, for higher toughness, which means higher hit points, followed by the First Aid Manual, so First Aid kits will cost -1 less AP to activate, and the Relished Anguish gloves that I already mentioned in the How to Play section. But this can add a lot of extra HP to Abelard when combined with one of our weapons, the Unquenchable Fury Mace. It's a new weapon from the DLC Void Shadows that has extra damage when pushing enemies and also extra push range. It comes from the Void Shrift Shrine even as early as the game begins by solving the pressure plate puzzle, so just press F, U, R, Y, A and E in that order for Fury Eye and you'll get the mace. Speaking about weapons, we also have a Power Pick, another new DLC weapon from the Fright Line area, I believe, which is the first DLC quest. It's unique in that it has amazing armor penetration, 45%, which is great for Act 1, as even on Unfair, you'll already be bypassing the armor of most enemies, so if you can't push enemies, let's say they are already next to a placeable or obstacle or another enemy, go with this instead of the mace. For cloaks, I just have the Blast Cape here for higher damage against demons, melee-wise, but you don't fight that many demons early, which means since Abelard is a good aligned party member with Iconoclast, you can also go for the Mantle of Heroism, which will increase his dodge whenever a heroic act is used in battle. It's true that dodge doesn't matter that much for him, he does get a penalty from heavy armor, but it's not like you have that many options early. Meanwhile, for boots, the Pneumo boots are by far the best choice and remain one of the best ones even later into the game, as they let your charge ability cost -1 less AP for just one, which of course is amazing because you can charge and attack in the same turn or just use charge to move, and bait enemies into attacking Abelard. We also have a unique DLC ring, Blood Drinker, which restores your hit points by +1 whenever you attack the enemy, followed by medikits as consumables just in case. Now let's cover Act 2 options, and as always there's a lot of powerful upgrades here, starting with chainsaw weapons. My preferred pick being the Heavy Emergency Cutter, which boasts enormous armor penetration, and also a very nice property of increasing critical hit damage for every attack by stacking amounts, until the end of combat. Chainsaw weapons are definitely the new best melee weapon types, because of their unique property of striking multiple times per single attack. So with just one attack, our chainsaw will hit 4 entire times. And get this, all flat damage sources, also percentage modifiers, are applied individually to each strike. So even if the base damage is very low, because of all sorts of boosts we'll have, we'll hit like a truck, especially because of the best melee boosting gear for almost any character, the Malpian Shroud. This is especially good on a Vanguard Abelard because of your unique property of stacking temporary HP. But anyways, whenever you attack the enemy and deal damage, first you'll gain temporary wounds, which is great, but most importantly, all of your melee attacks will deal additional damage equal to half your current temporary HP. It shows 0 here because we aren't in battle yet, but during battle, even at the second chapter, you can already hit for higher than 60, 100 plus even extra flat damage per each individual attack, which of course is godly with chainsaws. And this is how you get even up to 20,000 plus damage later, for every single hit. The Malpian Shroud is missable, however. It comes from the very first Fallstone Colony event, I believe. So in case you didn't get it, I mean, you can always use the Toy Box mod to spawn it in your game, unless you're fine with restarting. But it is that godly of a gear upgrade for a build like Abelard. So you can be the best tank and the best melee damage dealer. Especially because at this point in the game you can and should combine it with the busted Invigorating Resolve Talisman that I already covered in my Psyker God build. But essentially this is a very easy way of adding loads and loads of temporary HP to allies, even at the very start of battle. Speaking about temporary HP, you also have a very nice accessory upgrade, the Peculiar Trinket. Right at the start of battle, Abelard will already get a very nice amount of extra temporary HP, for synergy with the Malpian Shroud. It's actually much higher in combat, at least later, because the value is equal to twice your armor's deflection, and later we'll have armor with the absolutely highest busted amount of deflection possible. Besides that, you also want the improved Injector, which grants you even more temporary HP by using combat stimulants, and also makes the first use cost 0 AP. It's not really that necessary if you don't want to use stimulants because they are consumables, but some are replenishable from colony events. For gloves, we want the Augmented Gloves, for a very nice +10 bonus to weapon skill and +5 to strength. Meanwhile, for armor, a very nice upgrade is the Radiant Chestplate. It is, I believe, the heavy armor with the highest amount of deflection for the chapter. An amazing armor percentage as well, plus even extra deflection against area attacks, and more fellowship which stacks with the Helm of Determination. You can find it from the Plunder Voice Station area, I believe, which can also be rushed for at the early Act 2 gameplay. Speaking about helmets, there is a nice upgrade you can get here, which is the Enforcer Helmet. This lets your main taunt ability apply a very nasty debuff to the enemy saving throws when they try to resist it, which means they'll mostly fail the save, even without having any buffs on Abelard. Lastly, for another weapon, you should upgrade your Unquenchable Fury Mace into the Hammer of Epiphany. It's the same kind of item that can push enemies, and also deals 100% extra damage from pushing. But usually, at this point, chances are you'll just wanna spam your Heavy Emergency Cutter Chainsaw, because chainsaws are that godly when you combine them with the OP Malpian Shroud. Now let us cover Act 3 plus options, starting with the biggest upgrade, the Tempest's Elite Carapace Heavy Armor. This is one of the best heavy armors in the game, definitely the best one for our Abelard build. It not only has enormous armor percentage, 80%, but one of the most busted properties because it will add extra deflection based on your Carouse skill. And the best part is during battle, this can actually increase because Carouse is a skill directly tied to your toughness. And well, you do have a lot of toughness bonuses, especially from Cassius powers and an infusing staff, plus the Strange Vitality Biomancer Psyker talent. Which means, of course, your Abelard will have the most busted deflection possible, to the point no enemy will deal damage whatsoever to him. He'll always take 0 damage if he gets attacked. For Talismans, I actually like having him equipped with the Invigorating Resolve now, because it does work for all allies, so long as they're nearby. And as far as my main character build, I would much rather have him with the Star Mist Scarf now, so I just put Invigorating Resolve on Abelard. And by the way, because of how high your deflection is, just look at how many HP you're getting from the Peculiar Trinket at the start of battle, which of course has even higher synergy with the OP Malpian Shroud, so we have what, higher than 100 flat damage, which will be added for every single attack of our newest chainsaw upgrade, the LD Pattern Chainsaw. It has lower armor penetration than our previous one, but 1 extra attack for 5 entire hits per single attack. Once again, you'll be hitting for thousands worth of damage easily per every attack. For our hammer, I just upgraded into the Bone Cracker, but it doesn't matter because at this point you'll just be spamming your chainsaw attacks. Then for accessories, it's all about maximizing Carouse now because of our new heavy armor, so the Disinfection device for plus 15 to it, and the rest of the gear is mostly the same. Except for the helmet. Honestly, I just have the Provocateur's helmet here because I think it matches the look of the Tempest's carapace, so it's mostly for fashion, but you can kind of go with any helmet you want, including just remaining with the Enforcer helmet, but there's also stuff like Tactical Genius, even the face of the Sovereign. Well, alright friends, so this was it for our Abelard, the GODMODE Tank and DPS build. If you found this guide useful as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and also consider becoming a channel member if you can. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, and see you next time friends with more updated Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader companion builds.